Good morning again. Sorry about the technical difficulty there. So many things going on. We're going to get started here. This morning we're going to talk about requests for proposals. Now this is one of those things that we have to master in order to be strategic with our supply chain. Being able to get the requirement to folks so that your vendors can give you a good proposal, so they can give you the right kind of cost estimate so they can bid properly on what you're asking for. It's one of the most difficult things we do, and so many times we do it ad hoc, or we don't have a process, or the process is different every single time, so we're just not sure how to make it better. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is give you an actual process to actually follow and implement in your shop so you can be more proficient and more strategic in your supply chain. As I already went through the process, how is everyone today? Just go ahead and just go into the chat box and say, how is everyone today? Just go ahead and say, great, awesome, it's raining, and I don't want to be here, but I'm stuck here. Whatever it is, just go ahead and put that into the chat box and let us all know how you're doing. Great, awesome, good. Glad everyone's here. And we're going to have fun here. And what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about, the first thing we're going to talk about is the requirement. What is the perfect requirement that you have to know in order to properly source something? That's what, there's two elements you have to know to get the perfect requirement. We're going to talk about 4 different procurement strategies you can implement. One is the RFP process, but there's some other ones you may want to consider just so you can use the right tool based on whatever the requirement is. How do you manage your RFPs? The 4 elements for evaluating your proposals, and one of my favorites is the different types of contracting you can use. The reason I like to talk about this is because so many people talk about the firm fixed price contract all the time, and when they do, they don't realize that there's so many different vehicles they can use out there. We're going to talk about those today just to give you some other ideas so that you can create better contracts that are easier to manage for you and give you the results that you're looking for on a regular basis. Right now, what I'd like to do is ask another question, is how many years of supply chain experience do you have? Just go ahead and put it in the chat box. I'm not going to use the poll again. That seemed to mess up things, so I'm going to stick it to the chat box. Just let me know how many years of experience you have in supply chain. 6, over 25. Wow, that's awesome. 15 plus, so you can see we have a lot of experience in the room, and you want to leverage that. You want to make sure that we leverage our networking today, and that even if, you go into our Supply Leaders Academy group on LinkedIn, connect with each other, join that group and start to find folks and connect with us, because we have lots of experience. And the one thing we can leverage more than anything is just what other people have done. We don't need to relearn something or reinvent the wheel. We can leverage what other people have already done. So get to know each other through our networking. It's all about being strategic, not tactical. Many years ago, when I say many years ago, I'm talking about in the last 3 to 5 years, procurement was a function that was focused on tactics, processing purchase order, processing paperwork. How fast can you do it? But we're shifting. We're moving to strategic support, supply chain, and we're making things happen today. And we're being strategic in what we're doing, and we're making it happen for the long term to do that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is me. Why am I in front of you, and what gives me the right to talk to you today? And what I'd like to share with you is that I have over 20 years of experience in the Marine Corps doing many different things that you can actually come in and take a look and realize that it's all about processes and how do you manage major military operations, global operations all around the world, whether it's all around the world or just simply in the United States or in your country, in Africa and Pakistan. It's about having relationships and having processes. You can go and get this book here, Supply Chain Management by the United States Marine Corps, on Amazon.com. It's only about $4. Download it. If you don't want to spend the $4, send me an email. Heck, I'll send it a free copy to you for you being spending some time here today. Just shoot me a quick email. I'll send this right to you as a free copy that you can download and enjoy. And there's some very key things that you can leverage and learn from this book, to include planning, leadership, and using processes, using the right tools, and we'll talk a little bit about that later today as well. Our reality is that every day we're jumping through hoops trying to make things happen. I understand, and it's not easy. What makes it challenging is that we were learning from people that may or may not have our priorities in their mind, that we have to sit there and use our priorities as a way to leverage different processes to make it easy for them and makes it great for you in doing that. And here's a mind map. And what we're going to talk about today, this is a mind map of the entire process. Today we're talking about the RFP process, which is the fundamental understanding. To do this RFP process, one of the things you have to do is vendor rationalization, which we talked about a couple weeks ago. And then once you award the contract, you're going to want to administrate that contract to make sure you're getting the value you expect from your vendors. You're trying to think about all the different things that you want to get done, and how, once you award the contract, are you stuck with the terms? A lot of times possibly, but then you can leverage certain things to get even more value from your customers, and that's what we want to do. And this is the actual detailed mind map you get today. If you go into the materials section on the webinar, you can download this mind map and use it as a reference on your desktop, and you can go through that. And as you see this section over here, this is all the different contracting type of vehicles you're going to use and can use. And I want you to take a look at that, and we'll go through this in detail a little bit later. But before that, we're going to go through and talk about the RFP process and how it can help us be more successful. And it starts with a requirement. One of the most difficult things we do is get a good requirement. A lot of times our customers say, hey, I just need a widget. We say, well, what kind of widget? Well, just give me the widget. You know what I need. Make it happen. But it's not what they really want. We don't know what that is. So one way we get the requirements, we get a scope of work. We get more specifications, and we understand the performance and the design that we're looking for. Performance being how long it, what is it that, is it a 240 horsepower engine? Is it, a factory that can produce 10,000 widgets, that kind of thing? And then the design is, how does it look? How does it feel? A lot of us can relate to the sports cars that are out there, the Lamborghini, the Ferrari, and the performance is how fast it can go, how quickly it can go from 0 to 300 miles an hour, and the design is how it looks. How does it feel? How's it, comfortable it is? That's the design we're looking for. So that's the different specifications that you're looking for in a requirement. And you want to make sure that it makes sense for you, and that you get down that quality, so you let people know exactly what the quality is that you want. Is it high quality? Is it low quality? Is it just doesn't matter? You need to let people know what the quality is, because quality does cost money. The higher the quality, the more you're going to pay. And you don't want to over-engineer something. You just want to engineer it just enough to be successful, And then once we understand the requirement, let's go back a little step here. Let's go back to the requirement and understand the many different things. So I want to make sure we understand this and be clear, because once we have a good requirement, then the rest becomes easy. When we have a requirement, we get with our customers, we ask them, what exactly are you looking for? What's the scope of work? What is the specification? Exactly, what is it? Have them run that down for you. Have them maybe even give you a sample if they can. That's even better. What is the performance you need? Do you need it to be there on time? What is it, every Friday at noon? Does it need to be super fast? Does it need to be super strong? What is that performance you're looking for? And the design, what does it need to look like? How does it need to look like for you so that it meets those specifications there? And then what's the quality you're looking for? Is it really super high specs, 0.00001? You have a just-in-time situation where once it comes off the truck, it's going to go right on the line, so the quality is absolutely essential. Or is it something that's kind of, low quality, high volume, doesn't really matter. You just need to make sure you have it in stock so they can meet the needs there. Okay, so once we understand the requirement, we get with our customers and we understand that requirement, the next thing you want to do is we're going to work with our vendors. And now this is a process we talked about in the last webinar, rationalizing our vendors. In other words, getting the right number of vendors with the right quality. Many times you hear about companies having vendors, database of 5,000 or 10,000 vendors. But then when you ask them, well, how many do you really work with on a regular basis? The number comes down to 200 or 300. So once a year, twice a year, you want to go through your vendor database and get your best vendors who have served you well, who are with you for the long term and are a strategic partner for you. Like I said, we talked about that in the last webinar, and we're not going to talk about it here, but it's something that you want to go through to make sure that you have the best vendors, the right mix, the right numbers, so you're not wasting a lot of time with vendors that aren't there for the strategic long term. There's many benefits for doing that, and if you want to look at that webinar, let me know. What I'll do is I'll send you a recording. You can hear that and go through that on your own. So the next thing I want to talk about, once we have a requirement, we know our vendors, we're working with our vendors, is what is procurement strategy? RFP is one of it. The first one we can talk about is just simply an offer. You call your vendors and say, hey, vendor, I have this requirement. Can you give me a quote? And they give you a quote. Sometimes we do it with a phone. We call 3 or 4 vendors that we do it well, and they give us a quote. Sometimes we do it with email. Very basic offer, and from there saying, hey, I want to buy this. Next thing is an informal bid or informal quote. It's just something, again, it's not very strategic. It's not very, defined. It's just something that's there to get something quick or something that you've done very often, so you just need to call the vendor and say, hey, I need a few widgets, and they give you a few widgets, and they know how to do that, and you just have to go through a couple of them to make sure that you're getting the best price. This brings up a great point. When we go back to vendor rationalization, a story I'd like to share with you. I had one of our students who went through our training a few years ago, and he was working for a health fitness company, and they went through and they were working with the same vendor for like 10 to 15 years, and it was with cleaning solutions. And what he did, based on what he was learning in the CPSM training, was he said, you know what, I think we're going to bid this out. We're going to do some competition to make sure we're getting the best price. Immediately, that vendor dropped their price by 20%. So a couple points there. One, making sure you got the right vendors looking out for your best interest. You always have competition, more than one. And then when you go through this process here, just talking to them a little bit could result in some significant savings there. And then you go through the RFI, RFX type process, RFI, RFP, RFQ. That's where it's more formal, and we're going to talk about it in detail today. You go through that process, and you send out a quote or send out a proposal. You get back to yourself vendor proposals, evaluate those proposals, then award the contract. And that's when we're going to go and analyze our proposals. And then we have the sealed bid mechanism. This is a lot of times used in constructions or public type procurement, where the vendors send to you a bid. It's sealed in an envelope. It shows up at a certain time, a certain day, and then at a certain date and time you open them, and then lowest technically acceptable bid wins doing that. So that's another technique that we can use to help get our requirements to our vendors to help make sure we're getting the right thing. And then as we start to build this, so we've gone through the requirement, we've done our vendor rationalization, now we've talked about different procurement strategies. So based on the requirement, talking to your internal customers, figuring out what they need, when they need it, then you determine how you're going to manage your RFP. Now we're going to assume here that they've decided they're going to go through a formal RFP process. They're not going to follow any of those other things that we've talked about. They're going to go through the RFP process. So how do you want to manage that? First thing is coming up with instructions for your RFP that you're going to send to your vendors and say, I need you to submit to me a proposal that addresses this requirement. That requirement is based on what your customer told you what it is. You got the perfect requirement with the specifications that we talked about earlier. So you're going to give them very good instructions. So you want them to give you a format. Remember when we're going through school and the teacher said, I need you to submit a term paper at the end of the term, and we always wondered, how are they going to grade 50 term papers in one night to make sure I get my final grade so I can get my degree the next day? The way they do that is they all have a consistent format, and that's the same thing we're going to do with the RFP. We're going to give them a consistent format so you know exactly where to go to find the information you're looking for. That you're going to go in there and say, okay, this is the business, this is their pricing, this is their actual specification technical proposal, and we're going to talk about the different parts there. We're going to make sure it's a very clear format and they follow those instructions. Because when we make sure they follow those instructions, this is where they get to tell us how good a job they're doing. If they're just in the first phases of our relationship and they're submitting to you a proposal, they're putting their best foot forward. And if you've given them very specific instructions about what you want and they don't follow it, what does that tell you in regards to how it's going to go in the future when you actually start paying them a little bit of money? Okay, so think about that, and then you come up with the format, make sure it's easy to find, make sure your dates make sense. You don't have them submit a proposal on a holiday like today. Would you want them to submit a proposal today when it's a holiday weekend, everyone's running out the door? Are you going to get a quality proposal? Are you really going to do anything with it for the next 3 or 4 days? So why not give them more time to put together a better proposal? Okay, make sure those terms and conditions are clear. Here we're talking about where you identify the quality you expect so they know exactly what they have to do, what their payment terms are. So if they're net 60 or net 120, I heard a couple of times about 120, as a small business, they need to know that because they need to price into their proposal the cost of money. They need to finance that. In other words, once that's going to take to deliver, and once they deliver, how long it's going to take to get paid, they got to have those financing charges in their proposal, or they're going to get themselves in a lot of trouble. So you want to make sure that's clear. Again, this is in your RFP. You're sending it out there so that it's fair to everyone. And then as you start to receive proposals in, you want to maintain that confidentiality. You don't want to give a vendor an unfair advantage of what's going on. And just to share with you a story, here in Florida, we're going through Brevard County. We had 2 companies, AT&T, which is a famous telecom communication company, and Bright House Cable Network, which is also another cable network throughout the country here in the United States. Well, they were both bidding on the internet contract for the local school board. And here in Florida, in many different states, many different public procurement type processes, there's public disclosure, meaning the public has the right to listen to anything that's going on there. Well, at this time, they were in the final phases, and these two vendors were doing their presentation to the school board for a decision. Well, AT&T happened to go first. And when they went first, they actually, said, this is what we're going to do, and this is how much it's going to cost. Well, Bright House happened to be in the room. Now, again, this was okay, because it's sunshine law, it's the law. But Bright House heard AT&T's price. And then when Bright House came in and did their proposal, they just so happened to be 10% lower than AT&T. The result, of course, was that they awarded the contract to Bright House because they were cheaper. It was a procurement process, or a public procurement, so they awarded to the lowest technically acceptable offer. And AT&T cried foul, and they're now in litigation trying to figure this out. Again, you want to make sure you maintain confidentiality of your vendors, where even though you may have to abide by public procurement laws, there's other things you need to do to make sure that you get the best price. Otherwise, vendors won't play. They'll consider it. They don't want to give away their proprietary information, their pricing, which will end up losing the business for them, so they don't want to do that. Conflicts of interest was where someone that has the buying decision has a relationship, a personal relationship with one of your vendors. You want to make sure you disclose that. Whenever we have that conflict of interest, the bottom line is get it on the table. Get it on the table, let somebody make the decision, and once they make the decision, we're able to, avoid any conflicts of interest or appearances of impropriety. We don't want any of that. We want to make sure that whenever we make a decision, both internally and externally, when I mean internally, just because you're a private company, this still applies, as well as public companies where it's public disclosure, you want to make sure all conflicts of interest are disclosed. If for any reason you need to cancel this contract, you want to make sure the vendors know as quickly as possible so that they can stop doing what they're doing. They're spending time and resources building this RFP for you. For any reason you're going to change that or cancel it, they need to know as quickly as possible. And here we have protest. When we're talking about protest in the public procurement arena, whenever you award the contract, there's a point once the contract's awarded where the other vendors are going to protest for any reason. The contract wasn't awarded in accordance with the criteria. It's a new contract that wasn't the original requirement. But protests also apply to your private companies as well. And the reason for that is your internal customers need to trust that you're going to make the best decision. So if they already have a personal relationship with a vendor or have made a promise to a vendor, and that happens, I know it does, because you have engineers or other customers internally already working with vendors, developing information, doing market research and those kind of things, and then you end up going through a process like this and award to a different vendor. Those people are going to protest. They're going to say, hey, I thought you were going to award it to business A. And you're going to say, well, here's our process. And that's why you want to have a clear and transparent process like we're getting ready to talk about, so that you can avoid these processes and so that you are always above board and not in any type of conflict of interest situation. So whenever you make a decision, people trust that decision to be correct. Okay. Now, one of those questions I would ask is, how long do you allow your vendors to respond to RFPs? Just go ahead and put in the chat box down there, chat box, say, is it 3 days? Is it 30 days, 90 days, 120 days? Does it depend? Just write down in the chat box how long you normally give a vendor to respond to any RFPs you have. Okay, 2 to 3 weeks, 2 weeks. Okay, good. Anything you have there, 2 weeks. Okay, 2 weeks is popping up pretty good. And when you have a well-defined supply chain with vendors that know what your processes are, 2 weeks is a sound number. It makes sense. It makes sense. Now, as for some more complicated requirements, you may have 30 days, and I've been involved in procurements that have taken up to 6 months. And it's just because it was that complicated to do that. So depending upon how much time you want to provide them, it really depends upon the requirement and what's going to happen in doing that. Okay. And that's the response time. You want to make sure you have a good response time. Now, you've had your RFP out on the street, so we're just walking the dog on this to make sure we're following along the process. We've got our requirement. We've rationalized our vendor database. We've gone through, we've selected our procurement strategy, which is an RFP. We've managed our RFP when we sent it out on the street. We've gone through this process, and then we're going to get ready to receive these proposals in and start to evaluate these proposals so that we can get the best dollar or best value for our dollars. What tools do you use to manage your supply chain? If you can, just go right there into the chain, into the chat box, and just simply say, do you have an ERP system, an MRP system? Do you have some type of procurement system like Alibaba or any one of these other, Ariba, SourceDog, any one of these type of tools that you use, or do you just use Excel, spreadsheets, and access databases? Sometimes it's just email and hard copies. It's not really modern, but it's a reality. And sometimes, because these systems can be very expensive, and you don't want to spend time and money on systems that aren't really giving you the return on investment that you're looking for. So you want to look at there and make sure that you're using a good tool. So so got to do ERP, forecasting, Excel, everything and everything, and that's good too. Whatever tool you use, we just want to get proficient with that tool and make sure that we use it and we exercise it. The only thing I would offer is if you are in the email hard copy arena where you're just doing email and hard copy, you may consider upgrading to something else. Microsoft SharePoint's a great tool to use, easy to manage, cheap and affordable. Access databases, Excel, again, those are also very affordable. The key to it is going to having very well-defined processes that you can use all these tools with. The only danger of having desktop applications versus cloud-based applications is that if something happens to your computer, it crashes, or something happens to you and people can't get to that information, then there's a risk of loss of data, and you may want to consider that in your risk analysis in regards to what kind of systems you're going to use. So we're looking at the evaluation tools. You want to make sure that when you have an evaluation tool, when I say tool here, I'm not talking about a system, I'm just talking about a process, and that you can rank them from top to bottom, grade them on how well they're going to meet your requirement, and make sure it's transparent so that you can avoid protest, which we talked about a little bit earlier. So that if somebody questions your decision for any reason, you can go into your tool and you can show them exactly why you made that decision. And when you do that, they learn to trust you and give you the credibility you deserve as a procurement professional, as a supply leader in doing that. So that's why you want to make sure your tools allow you to rank, grade, and be transparent with your customers in doing that. And then you want to make sure you control the process. When I say control the process, is that you are in absolute control from receiving the proposals from your vendors all the way to awarding the contract. So you want to make sure they're received in a timely manner and that everyone hits the due date and they're not late. You may extend it, but you're not going to accept any proposals that are late. So you want to make sure everything's received. You're going to review it for correctness. Make sure that they followed your RFP instructions. That if you told them no more than 50 pages, then they don't have more than 50 pages. If you told them 12-point font, Times New Roman, you told them to separate technical, operational, and price all in separate sections, and they didn't do that, they're trying to win your business and they're not doing what you're telling them to do now, what are they going to do when you start paying them? So you're going to review for correctness, make sure that they're following your instructions. You're going to maintain your records so that you can show people what you're doing and why you're doing it. You're going to request any information that you may need, as well as respond to any questions you have from the vendors. You're going to control all this. You want to be able to control this using the different tools we talked about before, where you have your ERP system, your procurement system, whatever system you have, you're going to be able to do that with these tools. Be able to summarize it, even with just a push of a button, be able to push a report out that says this is exactly where we are in regards to our proposal process, and summarize it so you can report to hire. Hire doesn't want to know all the details, that you're waiting on 5 vendors. All they want to know is, okay, proposal on the street, we received 3 proposals in, we're expecting 2 more, and we're going to start evaluating on this day. So you should be able to summarize that report really quickly, and so people know what's going on in the RFP process. Not just hire and your management, but also your internal customers, because I know one of the questions I always received was, where are we on this? What's going on? What do we got to do, to get things on back? Are we going to make it on time? Actually, I just went through that this week when I was requesting something myself. Like, where's my stuff? And they want to know that, okay? And we talk about responsiveness. Here, it's just the same as we mentioned before, where the vendors are responding to your RFP questions, and that they're asking you the right questions, they're responding to what you're asking for, and they're meeting the terms and conditions of your RFP. Did they meet your specification? First and foremost, are they going to give you what you asked for? You asked for a requirement, which has 2 parts, specification, design, and performance, and did they meet that? Did they meet that? Do they have that first and foremost? Are they going to meet your quality requirements? Is that going to be something that you're going to allow them to do? Okay, are you going to have your quality requirements? Are they going to meet your terms and conditions? Are they okay? Did they read them? And that's one of the things you can do in your RFP process, is even to submit a RFP to you, they need to sign off stating that they will comply with your terms and conditions. Will you accept substitutes? Are they trying to give you a substitute? You know, here quality may be important for you, so you're not going to accept any substitute, or you're open because the requirement's not as defined as other requirements. You may be willing to accept substitutes for the law, you know, that may not meet your exact requirement, but they're going to meet the need that you have to fill for your internal customers. And once we've gone through and we've analyzed this to make sure the vendors are responding the way you want them to respond, if not, we're going to disregard, throw out, dispose of, whatever it is that you think you need to do for your responsiveness. Make sure that they responded to your RFP. Okay, so then we're going to do your analysis, and we're going to do it in different parts. We're going to do our technical analysis, our operational analysis, our price analysis, and our cost analysis, and finally our business analysis. And let me go through these in step by step. First is our technical requirement. Did they meet our technical requirement? Our specific specification, specific process or service that we're looking for, have they technically met the terms of our statement of work, our specification? Have they technically done that? Did they explain it in a way that makes sense? Did they explain it in a way that is understandable to your evaluation team? Then we're going to look at the operational capabilities of the company. Has this company done this type of work in the past? One of the things we would put in our RFPs is one of the criteria for a business even to compete is say they must have completed this or similar type of projects in the last 3 years. That way you know not only do they have the type of experience you're looking for, but they have current experience. As technology changes, you want to make sure that these people are involved and, you know, have the capability to meet your needs. And if you have a need to surge, do they have the capability? If you're working with a small business, they may not have that capability. So you're going to ask them specifically, do they have the operational capability to meet your terms? Of course, the pricing, which is where we're going to have and look at their pricing. We're going to look at total cost, not just the price you're paying, but the total cost of operations and maintenance, landed cost, all the taxes, tariffs, everything it takes to transport it from them to you. Okay, the disposal costs, anything and everything, you know, not just the price, but you want to look at total cost of ownership in here. That somebody may give you an awesome deal, but they created an Incoterms that's X-Works, which means they expect to give you control and cost as soon as possible, as early as possible. And so you want to look at that. We had somebody in our class, they had an awesome deal from a company overseas, but they had X-Works, which means they were responsible for the payment for transporting those goods from overseas to their dock here in the United States. Not only were they responsible for paying for it, they had to manage that, and they were not experts in moving stuff throughout the world. Instead, they were experts in doing what they did well. So what they should have done was get different Incoterms, more of the DDF type of term where the vendor was responsible for moving everything to you, okay, and they were responsible for doing that, okay. And then, of course, the cost. And then the business itself. Is this a high-quality business? Do they have the management team you're looking for? Do they have the experience? Do they have the capability of delivering the things you're looking for in doing that? Okay. Then we award the contract. Once we've gone through the evaluation process and we've gone through and we've decided who the best business person we're going to use, what the best business is, we're going to award the contract. And step one after going through the proposal is we're going to negotiate. Yes, we've decided on our top 3 vendors, and now we're going to get the best value we can, and we're going to negotiate them. That's an entirely separate seminar. We'll talk about how do you negotiate, preparing for negotiations, doing the negotiations, and to make sure that you are constantly in a win-win situation that is good for both of you, because you're developing strategic partners, not just tactical partners. Okay, and then we're going to look at different types of contracts. What is your favorite type of contract to use? Take a look at the chat box. Go ahead and type in your answer. Is it firm fixed price? Is it cost reimbursable? Is it an IDIQ? What kind of contract do you like to use? Just go ahead and type in the chat box. Let me know what kind of contract you like to use so that we can kind of get an idea what IDIQ. Okay, good to go. Okay, anybody firm fixed price? Okay, fixed price. Good, good, good. Okay, lots of, you know, a lot of people love the firm fixed price because it's easy. What makes you determine the type of contract you're going to use is requirement and risk. When I say requirement, the requirement has to be well defined enough so that you always have the ability to get the best proposal from your vendors. that if it's a loose requirement, you're not sure, then you don't want to get a firm fixed price. Why? Because the vendor is going to price in risk. Everything that if they can't win, they're going to price in their risk. If they're not sure exactly what their costs are going to be because it's a loose requirement, they're going to give you a high price. So based on the kind of requirement and how defined the requirement is, that's going to determine first, that's the first step, is your requirement, how defined it is, what kind of contract you're going to use. And then the other part is what kind of risk are you willing to take as a buyer, as your company willing to take as a purchasing organization. If it's not a lot of risk, then firm fixed might be the right answer. If you're not sure, then you may want to go for a cost plus. But let's go through some different contracts and take a look at them, and then based on that, you can kind of determine which one's the best price. Let's go with the firm fixed price first. Everyone knows this. Basically, you contracted with the vendor, said, I need widget A, and they say, okay, here's a price for widget A, and it's what I'm going to deliver, and that's it. No matter what happens, you're going to pay that fixed price. If the vendor has to go into more cost, that's on them. It's not on you. Escalation. Contract with escalation, meaning if the price of the raw materials go up, then there's a clause in there that allows the vendor to increase the cost of the contract, which makes sense. There's some commodities we just can't control. The market is controlling, just like the price of oil. Price of oil goes up when you want an escalation clause, but then here recently we went through and there was oil prices dropped, so there was an opportunity for costs to go down in a particular area. So that may be where you put in a clause in there for redetermination, which means at a certain point in time or under certain conditions, you're going to renegotiate that price based on what the vendor is going to give you. Incentive, if you have a certain quality requirement you're trying to meet or milestones you're trying to meet, you incentivize it. You award them. You give them a good job so that, you give them a reason to do and put forth more effort. Remedies, where you may predefine any remedies or claims against a contract so that you can limit your risk in a particular area. Downward price protection, this is where the price of the commodity goes down. That way you can also benefit from that downward price going down. And then a level of effort, fixed price with a level of effort, like on a service contract, which means you're not going to exceed a certain number of hours in that time period. That way the vendor is not on the hook for more than what they've actually bid for. They don't want to make them go and pay a lot more in labor costs than what they've actually going to get paid to do the job. So that's why you have firm fixed price with a fixed level of effort doing that. Then you have these cost reimbursable contracts, which just like they sound, it's the cost. Whatever it is, you're going to reimburse them. And then we're going to add maybe a fixed fee where you say, okay, it's going to be cost reimbursable plus, okay? Or you may have percentage of cost. This is the most risky because as costs go up, so does the percentage of cost. So it's going to be more risky for you. And the incentives, again, just like with the firm fixed price, you have certain quality or milestone requirements you're trying to achieve. You want to incentivize that. And if you may just say, hey, good job, you're doing a great job, you met our terms, needs, and conditions more than what we got, more than we expected, so you give them an award fee on top of that. So it's cost plus an award fee. And maybe you just give them a straight cost reimbursable. We had this on a contract where we were bidding a contract on a human resource information system. And basically the government wanted to do a firm fixed price because they wanted to fix that into the budget. And anyone familiar with public purchasing, it takes time to get money in the government process. And there was one part of it that turned out to be very expensive, and this was the integration between the old systems and the new systems. And that can be very easy, and it can also be very difficult for the vendor. So this is a part where we divided the contract up into a firm fixed price and a cost plus. In this particular part where it came to integration, it was simply time and labor required to do the integration with a limited on the level of effort so that it didn't get out of control. So this is where you have a different vehicle. You can help control your risk and control your costs. Sharing, where you have cost sharing, maybe you're in a research and development company or you're going to work with a company that can do something more than with that widget that they're creating for you. So you do a cost sharing. A lot of times you see this with the government or public entity where the government will pay 70% and the private entity will pay 30%, but the agreement there is that the private entity can then take that widget and sell it on the market so that there's a cost sharing there to do that. So there's an agreement there. Okay. Then we have some other kinds of contracts, IDIQ, which we mentioned before, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. We don't know how much we need or when we need it. We just know we're going to need it, so we go and put that on contract. Maybe a task order on a service type contract or some type of construction where it's very specific. A delivery order where you want to deliver it on a certain time. Time materials, similar to the cost reimbursable. A blanket agreement where everything's already negotiated, and then when you need it, you go in and you pick it up and you pay for it as you use it. A lot of times you'll see this in office supplies or other type of high volume, low cost items, so blanket agreements. You have a requirements contract, similar to a project contract, where you're basically contracting for specific requirements, certain delivery, certain quantity, certain quality, those very specific requirements, just like building a house. This would be a similar type of contract for this requirements type contract. A letter contract, we work with letter contracts when we write proposals. If the company accepts it, then they sign off on it saying we accept this proposal. So that's a letter contract. A dealer's agreement is very similar to just like it sounds. You're going to purchase it in return for selling it at a later date. So that's just a dealer's agreement. And then you have these service agreements. And that's, again, service agreements. You're talking about service, information technology, janitorial services, maintenance services. You may have a master service agreement where everything's already predefined. You may have a professional service agreement, maintenance agreements. These are all different types of agreements that you can have in place for service agreements. And then you have a licensing agreement. One of my favorite shows is Shark Tank here in the U.S., and one of my favorite stars on that show is Kevin, Mr. Wonderful, and what he loves is these licensing agreements where he just likes to, he's like, I don't want any of your equity, I just want $1 in perpetuity for you whenever you sell this thing. And we use licensing for software. Many of you deal with this. We'll purchase 100 software licenses. That means 100 people can use those licenses. If we go above that, then we have to pay for more licenses. We can't go that. We may have technology. These are all different types of licenses. Master purchase agreement, predefined agreements, just like the agreements above, specialty agreements. These are all different types of agreements. Now, as you can see, there's just lots of different things we can do. We don't have to go with the firm fixed price. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to go through this particular section today. And I know it's a lot of material, and there's a lot to learn in this particular area when it comes to different types of contracts. This is when you want to work with your customers, getting exactly what they need, then working with your legal team to get the right language into your contracts so that you get the best contract you need that's, one, easy to manage, but is also cost effective. And if you look at all these different kinds, there's a lot of stuff to choose from. So don't just go with the firm fixed price all the time. If you go into the mind map that's in the material section, you can download that. You can see this whole list of stuff. It's all spread out for you, so you can take a look at all these different things right here. Okay. Then we go on to award the contracts, terms and conditions. These are terms and conditions that we go in our contracts, and there's always one or two terms and conditions that we've learned the hard way. I know everyone has that. These are terms and conditions where, you know, I got to make sure that people, the vendors, understand this stuff, or else we get, you know, rolled and we end up going to the litigation or going to court. What is one clause that you make sure is correct in every single contract that you write or manage? Is it the payment terms, Incoterms? Awesome. Perfect. You want to make sure that those Incoterms are well defined and who's responsible for insurance, shipping, logistics costs, who is in, that's a great decision. Great clause. Anyone else? Anybody, payment terms is their favorite. They want to make sure, hey, those vendors understand that stuff, so they don't, you know, think they're going to get, you know, paid in 30 days, you know, and then it doesn't happen. Okay. So this is where, you know, this is what you're doing with the terms and conditions. You're setting it up for the vendor for the long term. You're basically setting out standards that you expect the vendor to abide by during the length of this contract. So this is one of the things you want to look at. These are legal things. What are the legal things? Where are you going to go to court? What's the financial? We talked about the payment terms. When I talked about legal, make sure the legal language is correct. Make sure it's in writing. My experience in business is if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. If it wasn't in writing, it doesn't exist. The financial, the payment terms. When are they going to get paid? Is it net 30, net 60? Is it going to be net 0? Are there discount terms for early payment? What are the terms? Jurisdiction, where are you going to go to court? This is especially important if you're doing business outside of your area. If you're doing business in a different state, in a different county, in a different country, if for some reason you have a conflict with your vendors, or as a customer, as a vendor, you have a conflict with your customers, where are you going to go to court? And what law takes precedence in determining how we're going to decide this? So knowing where you're going to, because you have to travel to the jurisdiction, you have to do the legal fees there, you got to make sure you have the lawyers that can practice in those areas, all that stuff. So this is an important part that you want to make sure is very clear to everyone. Who's responsible for insurance? What's the minimum amount of insurance required? Security. Are there security requirements? If you're dealing with information technology, are the people working inside your organization or working on your projects, do they have the right security background to work on your projects? Okay, one of the things here when you work with public contracting is that they have a minimum background check, that they haven't been arrested or there are no warrants out for their arrest or anything like that. So just a very simple background check to make sure that the right people are working on your contract and they're not employing criminals who are going to take stuff out the back door and then end up costing you a whole lot of money. Assignability. The assignability clause is very important, and this came up in a recent example I'd like to share with you. The assignability clause is where when we are doing the contract and all of a sudden say my business is sold to another company and I have contracts, and in those contracts has an assignability clause. That assignability clause reads that this contract may be assigned to another vendor or may not be assigned to another vendor unless approved by me in writing. The example I'd like to share with you is that I was working with someone in our training classes, and they worked for a battery company where they had proprietary information being developed by one of their vendors. Now, of course, they had the right contract with the vendors, but their competition purchased that vendor to get to that proprietary information. And because they had an assignability clause in that contract, they were able to cancel that contract and not allow the competition to get that technology. So this is a very important clause you want to make sure is clear in your contract to protect yourself and protect your customers, to make sure that you're not basically giving away the farm when the company's sold, or somebody may want to sell the contract, or they divest in something to doing that. So this is something you want to think about. Claims. Here is the claims process. If the contractor does something outside the terms of the contract, there needs to be a defined process on how they're going to get paid. And claims is where we define that process. What exactly do they have to do, how they're going to get paid so they can move forward there. Warranties, implied and express warranties. Implied warranties are basically I should get what I paid for. And then express warranties are very specific conditions where we have warranties, meaning, here in the U.S. we sell cars, 5 years, 50,000 mile warranty on the transmission, one common example. Other express warranties may be, must not do your own maintenance on this. If you do, it voids the warranty. Any different terms and conditions that you may have, with the warranties, have that defined in your terms and conditions as well. And then remedies, if things go wrong, what is the limit on those remedies? The limit to liability. If you're going to pay what we put in our contracts is we pay no more than the value of the contract. That anything, if we have a $50,000 training contract, that if we, for some reason go to court and we lose, we're not going to pay any more than $50,000 in costs and liabilities in that area. So that helps define and controls our risk in those areas as well. Okay. And then, so that's all the different how you award the contracts, things you need to think about when you award the contract. These are all different things. And again, I know you live in this world and it's not easy. It takes time, and if you have well-defined processes where you use something like this, where you're able to go through a checklist every single time, you get better and better and better. And once you award the contract, then you go through contract administration, and that's actually a separate webinar, which we'll do here in the near future. We'll go through and think about how do we best want to administrate our contracts so that we always get the best value. And there's not only things that are in writing, but there's things you can do leadership-wise to get even more value from your vendors, and we recently talked about that in our Supply Chain ACES program, where you learn to use the DISC method to help get more value from your customers and your vendors to do that. Okay. In summary, we talked about today 2 elements of the perfect requirement. We talked about that. You want to make sure you have performance specification. You want to know exactly what it has to do and what it looks like, and in those specifications, be as specific as possible. Talk to your customers, speak to them, and spend time developing a very clear requirement. If they can hand you a sample of exactly what they're looking for, even better. That way, when you go to market, the vendors have no doubt what they're looking for and how they're going to serve you. What are the 4 different procurement strategies? We talked about just an offer, an informal offer, the RFP process, which we just went through in detail, and then our sealed bids. We talked about the 3 parts of managing your RFP, making sure it's comparable, fair, and easy to manage, and then the 4 elements to effectively evaluate the proposal. We went through those elements there, as well as the 13 different types of contracts. And what I'd love to hear is, and more from you, is different types of contracts that you use so that you can be successful as well. So think about that so you can do that. As you know, what we do is we train people on how to pass the CPSM certification exams. And these are things that we do when we go out throughout the country and we help people learn these skills and a whole lot more so that they're certified professional in the procurement field. And this is what we do here coming up. And what I'd like to do is offer you a special today for being here with me on Friday before Memorial Day, 10% off. Just use the code Memorial-10 when you go to our page. And as you can see here, we have several different events coming up here in the near future. We'll be in Boca Raton next week, Anchorage, Alaska at the end of August, September, Chicago, D.C. in October, Atlanta in December. If you are interested in any of those and register today, you can get 10% off. If for some reason you're having challenges or need to get through a procurement approval process for corporate training, just give us a call and let us know. Okay. Hey, I understand. Bye-bye. I'm getting ready to wrap up here, and I'll field a few questions. I really appreciate everyone's time. Don't forget, you have a special offer, 10% off on any of our training. Just go to our website, cpsmtraining.com. Let us know. Please go on LinkedIn. Give us some comments. Let us people know how great this seminar was and what you learned and how it can add value to what you're doing here in the future. Now, what I'd like to do now is open it up to questions. If you can do, just go ahead and chat your question in the chat box, and what I'll do is I'll read the question and I'll answer it for the group, and we'll do that for about 5 minutes or until we run out of questions. So if anyone has a question, go ahead and just type it into the chat box. I know. And again, as people are typing, go ahead and just go ahead and put your questions in. What I really like about these processes is that it really helps people start to get better and more efficient in what we have going on in our own shops. A lot of times when we have people going through our training is that they don't have a process well defined. It's just something that they're doing. Every requirement's different, so every process is different. They're always running and jumping through hoops trying to make things happen, and that's just not fun. So by getting a process, getting it well defined, educating your internal customers on what these processes are is just going to make your life even easier. And then getting even stronger is when you get these tools and you start getting proficient with your different tools, it makes it even better even then. Okay. So I have a question. It says, what is conflict of interest? Okay, that's a great question, and that comes up a lot here in the United States. And what conflict of interest is, it's when somebody who has the buying decision or who has influence on the people making the purchasing decision. So myself, if I was buying something from somebody, then I have a personal relationship with somebody, one of my vendors, which may influence my decision. They could be a relative. So because they're my brother, sister, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, then I would award them the contract, and they would have undue influence, or they would have an unfair advantage over other vendors just because they're a relative of mine. Okay, or you have a business interest in a local business. This was an example I've heard several times where a buyer owns a business. And this just came up last week, actually, in a class. We were working with, a buyer who's in Hawaii, and he had this actual example. He's working with the university, and one of his employees for the university owned a company, and he was making decisions to purchase stuff from that company, which he personally owned because it was his company. So that was a conflict of interest. In other words, he wasn't making the decision based on what's the best value or the best price. He was making that decision based on it being, one, his company, he wanted the business. Another example is you make the decision based on them being a relative, or they've offered you something in return for the business, which then, of course, does not keep us above reproach. We have to be and must be above reproach at all times so that whenever we make a decision, people believe what we tell them, that we're doing it for the right reasons and what's best for the company. Okay. Does that make sense? Does that help? Akbar, did that help? Okay. Now, the next question I have, is RFP the same as RFQ, only that one is a proposal and the other is a quote? Correct. Great question, Alphonse. Is RFP equal to RFQ? The difference is that when you do an RFQ, you're simply asking for a quote. You may do this when you have 3 or 4 vendors that you work with all the time. They know what your specifications are. They know what your requirements are. You say, hey, give me a requirement for widget Y. In other words, everything's already defined. RFP is more complicated in that you're just putting the proposal on the street, and then the vendors are going to give back to you not only the what, but the how. They're going to basically say, hey, this is how we're going to solve your problem in detail. For a quote, you're just asking for a price. For a proposal, you're asking not only for the price, but you're asking for the details on how they're going to solve your problem. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, one more comment. It says, you have mentioned some in your previous presentation that I have missed. Is there a way I can have copies, documentation from those presentations? And is it possible? Absolutely. Please send me an email telling me exactly what you want. If it's the vendor rationalization one, absolutely, we can set that up and send that to you, as well as give you the mind map from that presentation as well. If there's anything else, again, anyone on the webinar still with us, we've actually got great attendance today. If you need anything or have any questions, please email me directly. I'm going to give you my personal email address, jqsllc.com. I put that in the chat box. You can send me an email directly to that email address, and I will answer any question that you have and send you anything that you ask for. Last one, are there any instances where you can bypass these processes? Great question. Should I bypass this process? Well, the thing that would determine when you may want to bypass these processes is time. Time being the most expensive of the resources we have. How much time do you have to go through these processes? If you have the time, I recommend going through the processes. The risk of not going through these processes are that you don't get the best value for your dollar because you're just making a decision on one or two pieces of information versus having all your vendors compete for your business, which then gives you a better understanding of what's available on the market as well as giving you a better understanding of what's available in the pricing. Okay. So lots of different things there. Okay. One question I have, in Pakistan, the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority has a clause. There's no negotiation with the vendor. The lowest bid will be considered as a negotiated bid. What is your opinion on it? My opinion on that, and I've dealt with this before as well on my experience with purchasing for the federal government in the United States, and it seems to be that they're always lowest bid goes that way. The key to success when you have this situation is that your RFP must be as detailed as possible to the point that whatever is proposed is going to meet your needs and more. Meaning that if you expect high quality, you have to put that in your requirements so that whatever is proposed meets that quality standard. And if it doesn't meet that quality standard, then it didn't, quote unquote, meet the terms of your RFP, so then you don't have to award to that business. So the key to this lowest bid will be considered as negotiated, or it is what it is. In other words, you have to go with the lowest bid. That's what you have to do, okay? You have to be very detailed in your RFP so that there's very little wiggle room in regards to getting what you're actually looking for, okay? So that's the key to the RFP, and I would love to work with you on that, Akbar. If you have an example, we can get on the phone. I can help you redefine that a little bit and, and help maybe point out some things where it may be a little loose, and I can maybe help you tighten it up a little bit so that you don't get in those kind of situations where you end up awarding to the lowest bidder and it ends up affecting the service and quality you're giving your customers, and that's what we don't want. We don't want that to where you award a contract to a vendor and it ends up not working out for your customers. You have to go through the process again, and then you get a reputation, and that's what we're trying to protect here is your reputation of credibility and being a trusted person to make things work to do that. Okay, good to go. Other questions? Please provide your email address. I provided a little bit earlier. Let me do it again. jqsllc.com. Okay, again, anyone has any questions, please email me. I'll answer your questions. Question, is this recorded? Yes, it is recorded, and it will be available later. What I'll do is go through and make sure everything makes sense and you can hear my voice and see my screen. And I will post this. It'll be on a web page so you can go in and take a look at it, maybe share it with your colleagues as well. Okay, we're right at the end of the hour. I want to thank you. Have a great weekend. Everyone, please be safe this weekend. If you're in the United States, Memorial Day weekend is one of those weekends where you have a lot of people out there on the road. Travel safe, be safe, take care of your family. For those of us on the international community, have a great weekend as well. Be safe, take care of your family, and if I can do anything for you, again, you have my email address in there. Shoot me an email, and I will be happy to take care of that for you. Have a great weekend, and I will talk with you soon.